Hello and welcome. The goal of this podcast is to get listeners connected with others in the sports industry because they say it's all about who you know, and now you know us. All right, everybody. Hello and welcome. This is your host, Connor Shank, and you're listening to the Constant Sports Podcast, the podcast that is committed to connecting you with other sports business professionals because they say it's all about who you know, and now you're going to know Keaton Tibbetts. Thanks for joining us today, Keaton.
I appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Yeah, perfect. We've been I guess in the same realm, kind of known of each other for almost a year now. So it's good to kind of have you on the podcast today. And for those who are unfamiliar with Keaton, he is the director of collectives and athlete relations at Encore Sports. And really, in this episode, we'll probably stay in the NIL college space a little bit, but we'll talk sports business, athlete representation, marketing, NIL, of course, collectives, like we're saying. So that's kind of where we'll stay, and we'll hit some home runs here. So Keaton, give us first question here. What about the sports industry, I guess in a whole, catches your attention? Why do you like the sports industry?
Yeah, well, I grew up playing sports. I was a big soccer, basketball, got into football in high school. So I played sports, was around a lot of the athletes. Obviously, those were my friends. And then when I got to college, it was kind of time to decide what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I went the marketing route, didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do within marketing, right? I knew that I wanted to declare a major and stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to find myself adjusting and prolonging my graduation by any
Right.
means. I was ready to get in and get out of school. With that, some of the guys I grew up with, they were able to play college sports. They were given that opportunity. Had a couple of guys played soccer, football, baseball, basketball. And so I was around them and was always fascinated. Even growing up, I was always fascinated by sports business, right?
Mm-hmm.
I love to see the behind the scenes type stuff. And as I was getting ready to graduate, I was in school through COVID. So a lot of my classes through my actual major were online. So it gave me a lot of time to kind of decide what exactly I wanted to do. So, I mean, and anybody that's graduated college or is in school, you get to that last, I don't know, year or so, and everybody starts to ask, all right, so what do you want to do?
Yeah.
And for me, for the longest time, I had no idea. I was like, I just couldn't decide. It was kind of that analysis paralysis. I couldn't figure out exactly what I wanted to do because everything up to that point, the job had been kind of a means to an end, right? It was like, okay, I'm going to be here until I get through school. I'm going to be here until I graduate. And that was kind of the job I had through college. I worked at a call center doing healthcare insurance, and it was definitely not something I wanted to do long term. So I felt like there was a significant amount of pressure to kind of get it right. And every time somebody would ask, like, what do you want to do? I always would say sports. I didn't know exactly what it was or how I was going to get there. I've always been fascinated from the management side of sports, like GM and front office type stuff. So I was in a class that was one of those classes that helps you prepare, LinkedIn and get your resume cleaned up and whatnot. And they kind of and what they had said to us was like, go through LinkedIn and connect with people that do things that you would want to do. So I used to spend that last semester and a half, I would spend nights sitting watching TV. And I would just search, a sports team marketing, and I would go through and connect with everybody there. I'd find industries. I'm big into golf, so I'd TaylorMade, Ping, Titleist, all these different groups. I'd go through and try and connect because that way I was connected with them. I could see what they were posting and things of that nature. And so that's what I did for a long time. It was just trying to connect. I looked at jobs with TaylorMade, both in California. They had a opportunity in Korea that kind of excited me. I was like, "Ooh, that's kind of cool."
That would be cool
to bounce out and head to Korea. Ping there in Arizona where you're at. Different things like that. I was just so fascinated. And then right about this same time, this is about summer 2021 to put it on a timeline. NIL launched, right? And one of my good friends, he played quarterback at BYU, Jaron Hall. I was chatting with him. I was like, what do you think? How are you going to go about this? And at this time, there was a solution for that for him at the school that they were working through and whatnot. So I was kind of keeping an eye on what he was doing and what some of the people in the area, what the opportunities were. And I actually saw a KSL article written by Mitch Harper. I come to learn later that was like Britton Covey and Chaz Ayu signed with local sports agents, Encore Sports. Yeah. And I had not heard of Encore Sports, right? So first thing I did, went straight to LinkedIn, found Brian, Jesse, Kevin, some of those guys, and just pinged them and connected to see what they were doing. And Brian got back to me, and at that time, I had a small background in graphic design.
Mhm.
I'd done some graphic design work for some high end recruits through high school, and different things like that. And so I had posted something to LinkedIn that I had made for Jaron, just kind of promoting spring ball and things of that nature. And Brian Fagan actually reached out. He said, "Hey, like your stuff, let's chat." Right. And he was telling me, he's like, "Look, we're just getting started into this. We don't know what it's going to look like,
Yeah.
but we'd love for you to be involved in some capacity." And I said, "Hey, look, anything you got, like, let me know." I
Yep.
remember, going through those messages on LinkedIn and kind of, looking through that. So I started with what you would call probably an internship, right? I was doing a couple hours a week, doing some different design work and marketing assets for them to use for the different campaigns they were using.
Mhm.
And he's like, "Look, bro, I can't promise you anything, but let's see where it goes." And I was happy to do it, right? So that kind of put me through my last semester of school. Then when I graduated, I reached out, and they were like, "All right, let's bring you on full time." So that's kind of what got me into it. I was always fascinated, like I say, by the front office, by the agent perspective. And my initial role was that graphic design, right? I was
Right.
going in as digital project manager. I was working on different campaigns within Encore and some of the other businesses that were within the Clear Home, as the parent company at the time, essentially. But very quickly, they told me when I came on, that Jesse told me, he said, "Look, you're going to get to wear a lot of hats." And
Yep.
I was young, aspiring, fresh out of a college kid. I was like, "Let's do it. Like, let's
Get
run. I'm
after it.
ready to conquer the world." Right. So very quickly it was, I remember talking to Russ, who's now the Russ White, who's now the president of Encore, telling him, like, "Bro, like, I'm ready to do whatever. Like, this is
Right.
what got me in the door. It's not necessarily what I want to do long term." I felt like I was pretty upfront about that. I was like, I'm not a graphic designer, right? I'm not going to sit behind a desk, and I'd get burned out.
Yeah.
But within, I don't know, 3 4 months, I remember I was in Texas working with TCU on a campaign that we had with them, and kind of fell into the logistics role, or that operations role, right?
Yep.
So a lot of what I do is managing the relationship between a brand and the
Mm.
athlete, kind of that middle guy to coordinate and do all of that. So it's kind of my background there with Encore, but it's been a heck of a ride. I think I'm coming up on 2 years since I started the internship. That was about August or so, and then December will be 2 years in office. So it's been crazy. Why, there's the buzzword or tagline of NIL. It's the
Yeah.
Wild West, and if I could count on one hand how many times it's changed, I would need several hands,
Oh yeah.
because it's like there was a direction everything was going, and then it would pivot, and
Yeah.
everyone thought we were going here, and that burned out. So now we're going here. So a lot of adjustments.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, a lot of the listeners and viewers can relate to kind of the starting of your career and wearing a lot of hats. And I feel like when, people are just starting their careers, are always asking, the older folks or whatever that have been in the industry forever, they always say, like, just get your foot in the door, right? And that
100%.
just shows a testament to kind of how you got your foot in the door. It's like, I might not be a graphic designer, you might not be whatever the title is, right? But just get your foot in the door and just stay there, and then, like in your example, it's perfect. You stay there long enough, they're like, this kid just keeps coming around, keeps producing, keeps doing
Yeah.
this, keeps doing that. And I think that's just kind of what it's all about. I mean, I've heard that countless times with people who've, been in the industry for 20 years. Like, their first job was like they were getting coffee, and then they were just there at 6 a.m. every day or whatever it is. And it seems to be kind of the recipe for success, believe
Yeah.
it or not. So, yeah, that's awesome to hear. And then, so just a little bit of background for the listeners and viewers. Encore Sports, kind of tell maybe the day to day, but I know you're in the collective space, you're in the athlete marketing. Is there some other business kind of capacity that the agency runs?
Yeah. So Encore initially started 2016. Brian Fagan just got out of BYU, had relationships with guys like Taysom Hill and Danny Sorensen, some BYU names.
Mhm.
They were in the league, weren't getting a ton of marketing love. So he said, "Look, guys, like, let me hustle for you. Let me do my thing." And he was quite successful at it. He had a handful of athletes that he'd do deals with. And then come around to 2021, springish, there was a group, Mercury Group, came to Brian. They said, "Look, we want to dive into this. We're going to help get some resources." And that's what kind of grew. So
Mhm.
Encore at its heart started with individual representation. They would go to athletes and say, "Hey, like, look, let's see what we can get you." And so that's where it started. Like I say, there was a handful of pro athletes in the basketball and football space. NIL happens, and they went crazy. They signed every athlete that was willing to listen. Very quickly learned that there's not necessarily a market for every athlete under the sun. So we've kind of tailored that back to we represent a handful of what we believe to be elite athletes within both the college ranks within different sports, but also in the pro and collegiate space, or excuse me, Olympic spaces.
Mhm.
So we do that. That's kind of one facet that we do. But right now, we're really focused in on collectives. It's kind of a term that keeps getting mentioned here.
Right.
Collectives are at their heart are a group of donors that come together. They a pool of money, if you will,
Mhm.
and then they need to find ways to pay the athletes, right? So with that, it's very it's not complex, but there's a process to paying athletes within the NIL interim policy, if you will, from the NCAA. There has to be some sort of deliverable, right? We can't just go out and give them the cash. There has to be something done. So we come in as an operator of the collective Encore, and we help to facilitate that. We take the donors. They have their day jobs, or they don't necessarily want to do this day to day. So we go in there, we take the day to day load off of their shoulders, and we're able to help educate them to what they can and can't do, and then work to make sure that everything that they want to do gets done with the athletes. We're on that logistics side or operation side where we contact the athlete, we help them through the opportunity, we make sure that they do everything that they're supposed to do, we make sure they get paid, all of that stuff. We're the ones that handle all of that.
Right, the day to day, and then just list off some of the collectives. I know you work with ASU, BYU. I just saw the other day your post about Iona. So,
Yep.
how many are you guys looking to expand? Kind of how's that? I would
Yeah.
assume you the Encore Sports is, thinks not thinks, but believes that the collectives are here to stay and they're not, going away
Yeah.
anytime soon. So just kind of tell the people a little bit about that process and what it's like to maybe build up a collective, start a collective, that whole thing.
Yeah, like you mentioned, Arizona State, BYU, Iona's the one that we've launched that we all work with day to day.
Mhm.
We have relationships with one of the collectives over at USC.
Mhm.
We've had handful of other relationships where we've helped to set up their collective, but we don't necessarily manage it day to day. So we're
Right.
8 or 10 of those, if you will, in total. But it's one of those things. I do believe collectives are here to stay. Collectives are a buzzword within the
No
industry. I think
doubt.
people, it's kind of polarizing. There's people that don't love it. There was the memo that came out from the IRS. A lot of collectives like to file a for-profit side and have a nonprofit
Yep.
501c3. The IRS came out and said, we don't know about that. So there was a lot of hesitation on how that's going to work. But I think collectives are not going anywhere, right? With the Alston, deciding from the Supreme Court, NIL as a whole is not going anywhere.
Right.
And I don't think that there's an avenue that they can shut down a collective, right? It's something that I think every P5 and most G5 mid majors, I think everyone will have an official collective within a year and a half or 2 years.
Mhm.
That'll be recognized by the school. A lot of schools have a couple. There may be one big one and some smaller ones. I think everything will condense down personally. That
Yep.
every
Agreed.
school will have one. I'm intrigued to see what the NCAA does with their interim policy. What expansions. That's one of the things we're in right now with the collective association, or TCA. Is we're out on Capitol Hill in DC talking with lawmakers. There was a hearing about 2 weeks ago, and one of the people on the committee for up on Capitol Hill was like, do we need lawmakers a part of this? Is the NCAA inept to do this? So kind of settling all of that sand is going to be really interesting, and we're excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, no, it is, and the IRS memo coming out, and different, congressmen and women trying to get involved. I think a lot, with the IRS is just trying to get their money, obviously, out of the
Yeah,
taxes and things. Like they're like, oh, people are making millions of dollars. We're interested, so we're getting stuck our nose in here. So that's funny. But as you've been in this NIL sector, maybe what are some for the listeners and viewers? What are some maybe top voices or I don't know, people, companies that you listen to or contact regarding, information or, just good people to follow for those who want to follow along in the NIL sector.
yeah. Two of the ones that come to my mind immediately: Mitt Winter on
Hmm.
Twitter, as well as Darren Heitner. I think
Yep.
they both have backgrounds in law, and so they're the ones that come out and are, I don't want to say they're bold, but they're kind of bold in some of their things that they post, where
Hmm.
it's like, no, this is the line, this is where the NCAA can't cross legally. Tez Walker, one of the athlete there at UNC
Oh,
that
yes.
just got the eligibility granted after being denied twice. Like they both came out and said, like, basically, if you don't allow him to play, you're opening up the opportunity to be
Yeah.
sued. And the NCAA immediately, was like, we don't want to get sued. That opens
Yeah.
up all cans of worms that people are not interested in being a part of. So it's just very interesting to hear like the legal perspective on that thing, because I don't necessarily have a law background,
Uh-huh.
right? I didn't go to law school. I'm not an active attorney. So to hear their perspective of like what people can and cannot do legally is very interesting to me. So those are the ones. And then, like I keep referencing TCA, the collective association, that's the association of the top, I think it's 25 now, collectives in the country, right? We're talking about Alabama, Tennessee, Clemson's in there, Ole Miss, like some big players within NIL are all together. So we get to talk to them frequently, hear what they're doing, things of that nature. So that's kind of the voices that I listen to. I think everybody has an opinion on
Uh-huh.
NIL, right? You talk to some old heads and they don't think anybody should get paid, right? They're getting their tuition covered and that should be enough. And so there's those perspectives, but there's definitely everybody has one, and you got to value as you can.
Right, of course, yeah. And I think as far as kind of the legal standpoint, I've been following them as well. And I think it's just interesting that it's either like, I feel like there's almost two sides, either like pro NIL or anti.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just me personally, but I don't ever see like a lot of middle ground. It's either like, no, you're paying our players and it's cheating, or it's like, oh no, like NIL is good. So I think that'll get kind of weaseled out and meshed in as we move forward. And me personally, I just think it maybe not fair playing field, but I feel like it evens the playing field. Like even this year, we're seeing like Washington's a top five team. Like the in the college athletics landscape, it's just so much more. It's not like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson are going to be the national champions. Like this is a way for it to kind of be maybe not more equitable, but I just think it's a level playing field for all, right? And it's not just like, oh, look at our facilities, and that's the one of the main recruiting points for the past forever. It's like we have the best facilities, and so I just that's my thought on that.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of concern that the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Clemsons were going to get even further ahead. But I
Right.
mean, look at like the NCAA Final Four basketball last year. Miami was in there, right?
Yeah.
Miami's never had any business being in the Final Four, but somehow now, now maybe they had a good team, good coaching. I don't know. Maybe there was some resources that are now available to them that they haven't had. I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that it didn't necessarily create this massive skill gap, if you will, that a
Mhm.
lot of people have anticipated.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think I think SDSU even got maybe Elite Eight or close in there, but they're a smaller school than the
Sure.
others. They're in the Mountain West and whatnot. So I think that's good to see. That's here to stay, as we've been saying here. And just a little bit of backtrack, but those who are interested in collectives, we'll just keep it at collectives for now, not to confuse anybody, but maybe just talk to the listeners, viewers on how those can get started, what maybe what the process looks like, how long does it take, and as we've mentioned, there's a lot of the P5 schools have maybe two, or maybe they have two arms, the nonprofit side and kind of the fundraising side, if you will. And I do think I agree with you. I think a lot of those would be converged into just one. It makes it easier, it makes it more simple. But tell us
Sure.
maybe how long it takes to kind of build one up and establish one from your
Yeah.
experience.
So in my experience, it's kind of been interesting because each collective's been a little bit different, right?
Mhm.
Generally speaking, collectives start because you got a group of donors that know that collectives are a necessity for schools to compete, right? Let's just call a spade here. It's going to be something that you have to have. I truly believe,
Mhm.
right? So you'll get a group of donors together, and they may start with a small amount of money, or they may have a large amount of money, whatever it is. As far as like the nitty gritty details of it, you're going to have things like you're going to want to set up an entity to house it. You don't want to you almost want to run it like a business, right?
Yep.
That's kind of what we're seeing with some of these other collectives is it's ran like a business, right? You're going to
Right.
have seeding money to get started, and then you bring in groups like myself in Encore, or you hire out executive directors, whatever it is, to go generate more business, right? You're going to go out to businesses and offer services to be able to use athletes in their marketing campaigns or make appearances, things of that nature, social media campaigns, right? So you're going to have that, because what we're seeing is that early on you'll get a group of donors, they come together, they put X amount of dollars in the pot, right?
Mhm.
They don't want to have to go back and refill the pot each year,
Right.
right? Donor fatigue is going to happen to a lot of schools.
Mhm.
You have to find something that creates recurring revenue and be able to have things that sustain you, because you can only go to the same person so many times before they're like, hey, like, what am I getting?
Burning money here.
Or,
Yeah.
I don't want to do this anymore, right? And that, if that's a big donor, and that's six figures that you don't have anymore, right? You got to replace that. So that's, I think, what we're seeing. There's been schools that, for whatever reason, I don't know, I'm not on the inside of their walls, but they've kind of closed up shop, right?
Yeah.
There's been groups that close the door or they cancel. There's a P5 school a couple of weeks ago that they canceled a lot of deals that they had with athletes that were kind
Yeah.
of on a more annual basis, right? I don't know exactly what those reasons were, but to speculate, it could be that the funding dried up, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, right? But that's something that collectives are going to focus on, is being able to have that recurring revenue. And that's one of the things that we've done at different schools that we work with, and to be creative, right? We want to be able to do things that not everybody else is doing, because at the end of the day, a donor looks at it kind of two ways. Some donors, they like to give out of the goodness of their heart. Maybe they went to that school, they feel inclined to give back. They're big fans of a sport. I don't know. But a lot of fans, they want something back. So collectives, in it's developing quickly the benefits that we're able to give to donors, right? It may be as much as like the collective puts together a trip to an away game and you get to fly private travel and you get tickets and things of that nature. There's still a line on what the school can offer to the donors, right? There was a hope that maybe schools would be able to give, we call it Cougar Club at BYU, or
Yeah.
loyalty points, whatever it is, right? Unfortunately, that didn't happen, right? If we could say that you'll get X amount of points to whatever the supporters club is to buy your tickets, get priority, that would be great. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, right now, that's not an option. So
Mhm.
creative, or collectives, have to be creative, and the other things that they're doing to make sure that the donors feel like they're being appreciated, and not just, your typical 15-year-old kid coming to mom and dad saying, "Hey, I need money.
Give
Hey,
me
I need,"
money.
right? So that's what I think will happen, is there's going to be a lot of creativity. I think there is right now. I can think of several things off the top of my head. Auctions for, Ole Miss. They auctioned off Jackson Dart's towel after the LSU
Yeah.
game, or they didn't auction it. Excuse me. They raffled it, and that generated a significant amount of money for them. Right. So having those kind of things for fans to be able to buy into, because you have fan bases that are, hundreds of thousands of people.
Oh yeah.
If you could tap into that, then that's your recurring revenue, right? And that'll generate quickly a monthly amount or an annual amount that you can operate off of.
Yeah, and I think Mitt Winter talks a lot about these collectives kind of being run as businesses where it's the revenue you got to pay, you got to pay here, you got to pay there, you got different expenses and things. So, you know, just agreeing with kind of what you're saying here is running the collectives and these sorts of businesses, or as businesses, is obviously the way to go moving forward, as collectives kind of grow and more schools, I guess, join the party or whatnot. And just kind of talking a little bit about your day to day and whatnot. But you mentioned it in the beginning, you're wearing a lot of hats, you were doing a lot of things. So what's maybe one project that you're working on right now that you can talk about, of course, that's kind of been cool to work on, or that you have
Yeah,
completed, I guess.
yeah, no, there's a lot of things that we got going on right now that I think are pretty cool. One of the ones, if I look at my day to day, it's not a very consistent day to day, right? Because I still I feel like I wear a lot of hats. I'm doing a lot of different things. Like this week, we closed a deal for a brand and one of our athletes, right? So it was wearing a sales hat, working with the brand to figure out deliverables and a price point that makes sense for both parties. Today, I've been in meetings listening to brands pitch ideas to us, for other athletes. So there's a lot of the sales side of it. On the more operations side, another thing I've been working on today is going through and contacting all of the members of a volleyball team to talk about a deal that we have for them, right? Give them the rundown on, what's expected of them, what they'll get in return, and how we're going to accomplish that. So that's kind of the more operations side of it. I do a little bit of what I would consider to be account managing as well. Excuse me. I work closely with our group at Iona. Had a call with them this morning that was going through proposing, recurring revenue models to them that, make sense to them and their market, because not every market's the same, right?
Mhm.
If I go sell, and this is my opinion, I haven't sold in the SEC, but if I go to an SEC collective and I'm selling to SEC fans, right? It might be a little different than if I'm selling to BYU fans or if
Mhm.
I'm selling to Iona fans, right?
Yeah.
Every market's going to be a little bit different. And even within the market, I mean, selling to Utah, selling for Utah's Crimson Collective may be different than selling for the Royal Blue, right? So it's kind of tailoring those offerings to each market to be able to do something that resonates with fans, right? BYU fans, there's a lot of things. They're a very passionate group, but they're going to want a lot of value for what they're getting, right? So we need to give them an offering that we're able to create recurring revenue while also giving them something that they feel like is worth their money, right? They're not necessarily going to be a group that just forks out cash and cash and cash, right? But you go to an SEC school and you might be
Yeah.
able to make a phone call and find $500,000, and that's a good Tuesday morning for you. So it's just a lot of that kind of stuff on the day to day. I would say it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think within sports, everyone generally can say that it's not uncommon to be doing several different things, and maybe you don't have like a set schedule, right? You're doing a lot of different things, maintaining a lot of relationships.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say, especially in the sports industry compared to others. I would say that's fair. As you never know what the day brings. You have your different tasks, whatnot, but you can kind of wear a lot of different hats, and you're always kind of moving and grooving. As have been in this position for a while, there are certain skills that you've seen or essential skills that you believe are maybe necessary is too aggressive, but needed in the sports industry.
Yeah, relationship. You got to be able to communicate. I'm a big LeBron James guy. He's the GOAT. I'll die on that hill. I'm ready to go up against anybody. But within LeBron's close circle, he has two friends. He has Maverick Carter and he has Rich Paul. Right, Rich Paul's his agent, Clutch Sports, etc. They have a TV show called The Barbershop. It was on HBO for a minute. I think it's on YouTube now. And I was watching one of their episodes of them conversating, and they were talking about like, what would you do if your kid came up to you and said, "Dad, I want to do what you do." Right.
Yeah.
And they talked to Rich Paul, who, like I say, he's negotiated billions of dollars in NBA contracts and other sports. And he said, I would tell my son the first job he needs to get is at a fast food restaurant. And they were kind of like, why? Like, how does that relate to being a sports agent?
Yeah.
He said, being in the sports industry, you are in the service industry, right? You are in the service industry, whether it's maintaining relationships with brands or athletes or any teams, anything in between, right? That really resonated with me because I thought about it in the day to day where I was like, that's very true. If I go to a brand and I'm just a total dirtbag, right? They're not going to want to do business because I don't just represent myself. I represent Encore. I represent the athlete that I may be, discussing a deal about, right? So being able to handle the service side of the sports industry takes some time because you got to think about it. Everything we do is around money, right? I think that you could say that around a lot of jobs, obviously, but we're talking about a brand deal that's going to have one party moving money to another, or a collective where a donor's moving money to the collective, and et cetera. So we got to be able to maintain those relationships so that it doesn't leave a bad taste or a sour taste in the mouth of that person. Because even from the athlete perspective, right? If we go to an athlete and we don't treat them appropriately or adequate, up to their standard,
right.
Maybe they just go take their talent somewhere else and go work with another agency, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that we focus on is creating relationships and maintaining those relationships, because without those, there is no recurring business. Somebody may do business once, and if it wasn't a good experience,
come back.
they'll move on to someone else. Exactly.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Agree with you 100%. And I don't know, I don't know if you're a reader, if you're kind of a YouTube guy or whatnot, but if you're a reader, are there some certain books that you keep on the shelf or that you've been reading? And if not, if you're kind of a YouTube, I'm kind of a mixture of both. I'm a big YouTube guy and watch different podcasts on there and whatnot. But where kind of you get your maybe business info, maybe sales and marketing strategies and whatnot?
Yeah, I am not as much of a reader as I'd like to be. I do read from time to time. A book I'm reading right now, driven by the autobiography about Larry H. Miller. Right, it's been really interesting to see that perspective. One that I recommend to everybody, and I think it's a very cliche one within the business world, is How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie.
Yep.
That one, I believe that book, from a personal experience, it has had the biggest impact on my business perspectives. Right, that was something I read. I actually listened to it. That was an audio book at the time. That's a thick book. You really got to be a reader to get through that one. But the audiobook version was perfect for me, and it helped me at a time where I had to improve on my relationships. Right, it was just there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was something that I had to do. So those are the two that come to mind. Four Agreements is another one that I've listened to lately.
Oh, yep.
Just kind of another one about relationships and kind of almost a mental side of it. But yeah, YouTube. I'm a big YouTube guy. I consume a lot of content on YouTube. It's more content than it is, improvement per se. Guys like Eric Thomas and the motivational speakers, Tony Robbins, Les Brown, Zig Ziglar. Those guys always have a special spot in my heart. Right. I would love to get the opportunity to sit down and pick their brain. Some other leadership ones that I like, Nick Saban. I
Yeah.
hold Nick Saban probably higher than I should,
Hey,
to
join the club.
a large degree. I'm a big Saban guy. Those types of things. There's a lot of videos on Saban, his leadership speaking. I was watching one this morning. He has a weekly spot on Pat McAfee show, right?
Yep.
If you had told me that Pat McAfee would have a weekly spot with Nick Saban, I probably wouldn't have believed it. But hey, here
Nope.
we are in 2023. But that's kind of where I'm at as far as like content goes and business ideas.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think especially just nowadays, YouTube just easy. You kind of have multiple screens. You pop it on and you can kind of listen to it.
Exactly.
And yeah, I'm pretty much the same boat there with a lot of the speakers and things. And so I guess kind of as we close here, what's maybe some of the what maybe the future for Encore Sports or yourself, or there's some 5 years down the line. Kind of do you kind of envision yourself somewhere doing something, or just kind of what's your kind of vision for yourself going forward?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I work in a space that's quickly developing, right?
Right.
So what is relevant today, especially within NIL, may not be relevant in 18 months or even sooner. I think that Encore is on a trajectory to be a major player within NIL. I think that we'll become a household name to operate collectives. I foresee that happening. So within 5 years, I'd like to see us up there when you talk collectives, like our name just comes up, right? That's, I think, what we're after. So that personally, I mean, I have personal goals. I'd like to see, different things. I have career aspirations that
Hmm.
are within the sports industry, right? It's kind of interesting. It's tough to get in the sports industry. There's, always going to be more people than there are jobs available, I
Yeah,
think.
no.
Um, so I'd like to stay within the sports industry. And there's ideas that we've spit around with Encore about venturing into different facets of the sports industry that we'll
Hmm.
see if that ever comes to fruition. But I'm confident that if we can keep on the same trajectory where we're at, that we can be a major player within this industry.
Yeah, no, believe it. Yeah, put it on the books, put it on the record. You heard it here first from Keaton himself. So we appreciate you jumping on today, Keaton, and sharing a little bit of your thoughts and opinions on some different matters in the NIL space and collectives and sports. So I guess to end, we're just kind of give you the next minute or so to you can give you the floor, give any shout outs, any plugs, anything you got going on, or where people can follow you or Encore. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah, follow us everywhere. Encore Sports, LinkedIn. We're always trying to generate business, right? Reach
No
out, keep
doubt.
Encore Sports or EncoreMarketing.com. Excuse me. But no, yeah, I think go out and life's tough sometimes. Just keep pushing. I think that there's a lot of power in that, and it ain't always going to be sunshine and rainbows, as Rocky says.
There it
Life
is.
will beat you to your knees and keep you there if you let it. Um, but yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come chat with you today, Connor. I've been following Constant Sports there on socials, seeing what you're doing, and obviously you
Yeah.
and I we've had opportunities to chat offline, and I'm very impressed with what you do and what you're able to do. So I appreciate the opportunity to come chat with you today.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks for everyone for listening and watching. This has been another episode of the Constant Sports Podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, basically anywhere you get your podcasts. And today you met Keaton Tibbetts, and we'll see you guys next week.